Hello, Cornerstone Church. Pastor Phil here, coming to you on day 15 of our 21 days of passion for Jesus. 21 days of growing in our knowledge of God, our knowledge of what He suffered for us. That's one of the definitions of passion that we're working with. And growing in our love for Him, which is the other definition of passion that we're working with. At the same time, working our way through a lockdown and trying to see how do we handle this time. We've been having wonderful times of prayer every night via Zoom. I would encourage you, if you have not joined us, please make some time and join us for this. I think we had 13 people at one point last night connected to the video, and a 14th that was trying to get in. So we're trying to make some time, but we're seeing more people come together in prayer. And that's what I want to encourage us in. I want to flip the switch a little bit. I've been looking at this more from the defensive side of how do we survive this lockdown? How do we survive this pandemic? Talking about trusting in God, talking about standing in faith, talking about confidence that God will ultimately deliver us, the confidence to know that the worst that this virus could do to us is really not that bad, that death is really not our enemy, and that in many ways it's a promotion for us. In every way, it's a promotion for us. So I've been encouraging us, but those are all on the defensive side. And I thought about it today as I was reading, basically, continuing to work through Psalms. I just finished the book of Psalms this morning. And Psalm 144 really got me thinking a little bit differently about this. Instead of looking at it from the defensive perspective of how do we survive this pandemic, how do we survive in a lockdown, I want to encourage us, how do we go on the offensive? How do we move forward in this pandemic? How do we move forward in a crisis? I said the last Sunday that we had, which was now almost 3 weeks ago, and the first Sunday in talking about this, and I quoted a political slogan, which I heard from the mayor of Chicago at one point, which he said, never let a crisis go to waste. And I think in many ways that really should be the mantra of the church. We should never let a crisis go to waste. We have to look at this as a wonderful opportunity to reach people for Jesus. And not that we're ever opportunistic. We can never be opportunistic about that. And the reality that people are dying really should break our hearts, and I know it does. I don't deny any of that. I don't minimize it. And I've spoken to people, and we heard in the prayer just the intensity of people's emotions. That I know that the reality of this is touching people's hearts and touching people's lives. So we're not being callous, and I'm not being callous when I say that. But what I'm saying is that we need to capitalize for the kingdom of God. We need to help people to see their eternal salvation through this episode. Maybe as they have a greater sense of their mortality, we could provide the good news that their mortality is not the end of the discussion, that God has something that goes beyond their mortality. God has the solution, the antidote to their mortality. They're busy searching for an antidote to the coronavirus and a vaccine for the coronavirus. Well, the greatest antidote to sin and death is the gospel of Jesus Christ. And the reality of the situation is everybody's going to die. If you don't die from the coronavirus, you'll die of a heart attack, or you'll die of old age, or you'll be struck by a car or hit by lightning, or whatever it may be. We're all going to die. But the true antidote for death is the gospel of Jesus Christ and the salvation that God gives us through the cross. So we need to learn how to go on the offensive and try to make headway in spite of what's going on around us, in the face of some really bad circumstances. I want to look at Psalm 144. And this has been a passage that's just long been in my mind, in my imagination, in my thoughts. And it's a Psalm of David, and he says this. He says, "Praise be to the Lord, my rock." So you can't ever fault anybody when they begin with praise. That's really always a great way to begin. Praise be to the Lord, my rock. That's a great declaration to start off. Offering praise to the one who is our foundation, our stability. He is our rock. So praise be to the Lord, my rock. But then he says this, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. And that phrase has always stuck in my imagination, in my heart. Who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. And I think about it from this, now from David's perspective, he's talking about physical warfare. He's talking about the ability to handle a sword, or the ability to handle a shield, or the ability to shoot an arrow, or the ability to shoot a sling. We know that David was very skillful in the art of a sling. That's what took down Goliath. And he hit a very, specific target. I mean, it says that he planted the stone in the middle of Goliath's forehead. Now, Goliath was 7 feet tall. I don't know how big his head was. His head was probably pretty big. But still, his forehead, that's a pretty small target. And I'm sure he had a helmet on. So there was only one point of attack to the forehead, and that was directly at a certain angle. And David managed to hit that one spot that he was vulnerable in. So his hands were very skillful. And I think he's talking about that in this declaration of praise to God. But how do we understand that now? Our hands, we don't carry on warfare the same way that David did. Our warfare is spiritual. As I've been saying all along, Ephesians 6, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the spiritual forces of darkness in the heavenly realms. That is our battle. And that battle can only be won through prayer. But that's where I think this passage is very enlightening. Praise be to the Lord, our rock, who trains my hands for battle. Our hands become weapons of prayer. In 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 8, Paul says, I want men everywhere to lift up holy hands in prayer. There's some way, and I know that in that context, the hands are symbolic. It's not like our hands are actually being used in some way where our prayers become more effective because of the use of our hands. But we do have to realize that the hands are a part of our prayer life, whether we fold them, whether we lift them before God, however we do it, it's symbolic of prayer. So God trains our hands for battle in that he teaches us how to do warfare in prayer. And that's what we need to see in this moment of time. We need to do battle in prayer. And God is the one who trains us to do that. He trains us, our hands for battle. And I like, he trains our hands for war, my fingers for battle. And my background is we have a charismatic background. Charismatics in prayer, they can be very taking authority over demonic principalities and so on, and very a lot of hand motions, a lot of gesticulations with the hands. And I think like this sometimes. When you take an authority, it's like a parent speaking to their kid. You go to your room. I've had enough of you. And there's a wagging of the finger. And I've always thought of this passage in relation to spiritual warfare and taking authority over demonic principalities. He trains our fingers for battle. He teaches us how to do that. And we need that now in this present moment. We need to go on the offensive in prayer. So please think about that. Pray about joining us in our prayer meetings. We're doing Monday through Saturday, every night at 7:30. We're going to continue to keep that pattern going for as long as we're on lockdown, maybe even beyond. We'll have to see how that goes. But some of these prayer times have been really wonderful. And so let God train us in the art of spiritual warfare. Let him teach us how to use our fingers for battle. On the passion side, returning, and I'm going to be very brief about this, returning to the sufferings of Jesus. I want to look at a passage when Jesus was arrested by the Sanhedrin. He was brought before the high priest and they questioned him, and they could not find any witnesses to bear testimony against him. So they asked him directly, "Are you the Christ, the Holy One of God?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "You're going to see you'll see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of glory." And the high priest tears his robes and accuses him of blasphemy. And then Luke's gospel records this in Luke chapter 22. It says, "The men who were guarding Jesus began mocking and beating him. They blindfolded him and demanded, 'Prophesy, who hit you?' And they said many other insulting things to him." So what I want to look at here in this passage is the blindfold. The blindfold and the way they used it. They put a blindfold on him and then they beat him. Now, on the physical side of it, the significance of that is that our eyes actually help us when we're in a crisis situation. If you're in a car accident, if you're going to fall, or if you see something coming at you, your eyes are the first line of defense, because they see something coming at us and they immediately send the body into the fight or flight mode. So there's a place where our body tenses up. We prepare for the blow. Because Jesus was blindfolded, he could not prepare for the blow. And they were that much more effective, that much more hurtful, because he was not able to prepare for that. But then there's also the double aspect where when they blindfolded him and hit him, they mocked him at the same time, and they said, "Prophesy who it was that hit you." In other words, show me that you're really the Son of God. Show me that you're really God in the flesh, and do something spectacular for us here. Tell us who it was that hit you. So not only do they carry out something that will hurt him much more than it would have otherwise, but then they mock him on top of it. And this is just the beginning of his sufferings here. As they arrested Jesus, this was one of the first things they did to him. And again, we see his passion. We see the greatness of what he suffered, and he suffered it for us. So may God lead us in going on the offensive at this time and starting to take some ground for him, and at the same time reveal to us more deeply the greatness of his love. God bless you. Have a wonderful day. In Jesus' name.